Hi, everybody. I'm Pierre Bouvard, Chief Insights Officer here at the Audio Active Group at Cumulus Media in Westwood One. And today we're going to turn our attention to a radio format that is fast growing and offers advertisers an unbelievable platform of purchase intent. And that platform is the sports radio platform. These are radio stations that have play by play of sports as well as sports talk. And this is a format that has seen significant growth over the last decade. Big increases in revenue share, big increases in station counts. And surprisingly, Nielsen streaming data reveals that the sports format is actually the most listened to format among 1834s and 2554s. Number one in 1834 and 2554 streaming. When it comes to income, that's where all of that purchase intent comes from, because the format, according to MRI and Simmons, ranks third of 24 formats and over indexes on a whole variety of different purchase categories. Now, we consult new research from Nielsen, from Quantilope, from Edison Research's Share of Ear, as well as MRI Simmons, to take you through the latest on the sports radio format. 7 key findings and key takeaways. Number one, the number of sports formatted radio stations has exploded over the last decade. It's up 14%. Revenue shares, according to Miller Kaplan, are up an eye-popping 38%. And according to Nielsen, the sports format ranks number one in streaming shares for both 1834 and 2554. And for the over-the-air sports radio audience, the car is the dominant location of listening. Over the last decade, audiences to Westwood One's NFL primetime coverage, as well as NCAA March Madness, has seen significant growth in season-long audiences. Now, advertising on sports radio is more effective than TV sports because the radio audience is much more sports engaged, much more sports passionate, and therefore your ads work so much harder. Now, ranked number 3 of 24 formats in income, the format has seen 17% growth in average income since the beginning of the decade. And across a wide array of purchase categories, AM/FM radio sports has seen significant purchase intent that is much higher than the US average. And interestingly, when it comes to AI, it is the sports radio format that is really leading the way with greater interest and greater usage and willingness to pay for AI services. So let's now zoom in and take a look at the sports radio audience. According to Nielsen, not surprisingly, the reach in a typical week skews male. 1 out of 6 American men are reached by sports radio in a typical month. And the number of stations has soared. Since 2015, the station count is up by 14%. In many cases, these are AM stations that are now simulcasting on FM to grow their reach and their distribution. Miller Kaplan is the accounting firm that tracks local radio ad revenues. Over the past decade, they report the sports radio revenue shares have grown from 9.3% to 12.8%. That is a 38% increase in revenue shares over the last decade. Now let's take a look at this Nielsen streaming data. Every quarter, Nielsen releases something called The Record on their public website. It shares some very cool Edison Share of Ear data. But right below that is a little link to a streaming report that they update every quarter, and it's called additional information. You can kind of easily overlook it. But what they do is they take total radio shares and then compare them through the portable meter data across all of their PPM markets to the shares among streaming. So let's take a look at the difference between the overall sports share for all radio, which includes over the air and streaming, and then the streaming shares. And it's quite a story. So for persons 18 plus, the sports radio format is ranked 5th overall. It's a tie. But its rank among the streaming audience for 18 plus is number 2. Its share goes from a 5.1 to almost double or more than double to an 11.7. Here is the head snapper. Let's look at 1834. Among 1834 overall, the format is number 11. It is number 1, 1834. It goes from a 3.7 overall share to a 13.9 share of streaming. That is almost a 4x increase in share. 2554, sports goes from number 6 overall to number 1 format among 2554. The share almost tripling, 5.1 to a 14.2. So if you as an advertiser are looking for some of the younger demographics, don't think it's always going to be hip hop or some kind of a younger music format. Look at these younger demo shares for sports streaming. And then 35 plus goes from number 5 to number 2, goes from a 5.4 share, doubling to an 11.4. So a huge, loyal streaming audience for the sports format. Now, according to Edison's share of ear, if you look at all time spent with sports overall, 61% of it goes to AM FM, 27% podcast, and about 12% Sirius XM. So radio is still the dominant share of time spent for the format. And among those that are listening on radio, sports is an all-day thing, not necessarily just a drive time thing. In fact, the number 1 day part for time spent to sports is midday, 10 to 3, with 1/3 of all tuning minutes, according to Edison, occurring midday, closely followed by morning drive and then afternoon. And then nights and overnights have 15% of sports radio time spent. Now, from a location of listening to the left of your screen across both streaming and over the air, the car and the home tied at 47% of all minutes spent with the format. But to the right of your screen, when you look at just the over-the-air sports radio audience, it is the car that dominates, capturing 57% of all time spent to sports radio occurs in the car. Now, if we look at season-long reach accumulation, this is where play-by-play really shines on the radio. When you look across an entire season, a special Nielsen report commissioned by Westwood One, examining the season-long audience for NCAA basketball, 20 million unique people reached across the season. The NFL is a gigantic story. These are the prime time Westwood One broadcasts for Monday night, Thursday night, and Sunday night football across the regular season into the postseason and the Super Bowl. The Westwood One cumulative reach is 64 million Americans reached on a seasonal basis. And that has been growing. Going back to 2017, about a decade ago, the season-long reach is up 26%. Now, why is advertising on radio sports more effective than advertising on TV sports? It comes down to some hard data from MRI Simmons that reveals the radio audience is just more passionate about sports. They're not leaned back like the TV audience, they're leaned in because they are super sports engaged. So let's take an example from MRI Simmons and look at the NFL TV audience, the NFL radio audience across 5 measures of sports engagement: going to games, consulting a sports app on your phone in the last month, being sought after by friends and family for your expertise on sports, being considered a sports influential consumer, and whether or not you participate in fantasy sports. Now, each of these distinct measures are sports engagement. And as you can see across every single measure, it is the radio audience that is more passionate. It is the radio audience that is far more likely to be sports engaged. And for you as an advertiser, that means that your message is going to get more attention. It's going to get more engagement because the content is lean forward versus the lean back TV audience. Now, turning our attention to NCAA basketball, MRI Simmons collected these 9 different measures of March Madness engagement. And regardless of the measure, you can see that it is the radio audience to March Madness that is much more engaged and much more passionate, and therefore your ads work so much harder in March Madness on the radio than on TV. So now let's turn our attention to the purchase profile of the sports format. MRI Simmons reveals that the format is number 3 in income of 24 different formats, just behind All News and NPR. This income has grown 17% since the beginning of the decade. And if we look at the qualitative profile of those that watch sports on TV versus those that watch or listen on radio, the radio audience is more upscale. They're more likely to be employed and married and a college grad. So it's a better qualitative profile. We see the same thing with the March Madness audience. The radio audience, younger than the TV audience, more likely to be employed, bigger households, more likely to have kids, and bigger income. So that's why really sports is where the purchase intent is. All of this engagement, not surprisingly, leads to just eye-popping sports betting engagement with huge indices for all the major sports betting brands. When it comes to auto maintenance and repairs, MRI Simmons reveals that spending $1,000 or more, the sports radio audience is 24% more likely to be heavy spenders on auto repairs. When it comes to auto parts, the sports audience are very frequent shoppers. The greater the number of shopping occasions, the more likely you're going to find them on the AM/FM sports radio audience. Speaking of vehicles, when it comes to a new vehicle, a leased vehicle, a sports audience, 6 to 7% more likely to be in the market. And take a look at the brands that the sports radio audience owns. I mean, this is a who's who of luxury brands. We've color coded the brands for bright blue are the luxury brands, and you got every single major luxury brands way over index. You've got your BMWs, your Teslas, your Acuras, on and on, as well as some mass market brands. In the financial category, when you take a look at major financial institutions used, the sports radio audience way over index on just about every major brand and the credit cards that they issue. So this high income translates into a wonderful environment for the financial category. Now, turning our attention to travel, way over index on all the hotel brands, the airline brands, and cruise line brands. So a tremendous purchase profile for the sports radio format. Now, interestingly, a new study from Quantalo, fielded just a couple of months ago, examined the overall interest and usage of AI among average Americans. And they did a breakout for the sports format and those that are listening to sports podcasts. So overall, 22% of Americans say they're very interested in learning more about AI. But look at the sports audio audience, twice as likely to say they're very interested in AI. And then when it comes to using AI in their personal life, it is the sports audio consumer that is much more likely to be frequently using AI in their personal life. What about at work? Another big story here. The sports radio audience, the sports podcast audience, way more likely to be frequent users of AI at work. And what's the degree of interest in actually paying for AI services? Well, 1 out of 4 Americans say they would be willing to pay for AI products, but it's 1 out of 2 sports audio fans. So the sports audience is on the cutting edge of technology. They're very interested in AI and they are big users. So our 7 key findings on this sports audio format. The number of stations has grown 14% over the last decade. Revenue shares up 38%. The format has astonishing streaming shares. Number 1, 1834, number 1, 2554. And for the over-the-air audience, the car is the dominant location of listening. Over the last decade, season-long reaches for Westwood One's NFL and NCAA broadcasts have soared. The format is ideal for just about every category because the audience pays more attention than the TV audience. The audience is way more sports engaged than the casual TV audience. And the spending power is there, ranked third out of 24 formats in income, which is up 17% since the beginning of the decade. And as you saw across a wide array of purchase categories, the sports radio format way more likely to be in the market. And as we saw when it comes to AI, the sports radio format is on the cutting edge, much more likely to be engaged, using, and willing to pay for AI. The Audio Active Group here at Cumulus Media in Westwood One is a full service national brand advisory. We help our clients measure impact with things like brand lift, sales lift, search and site attribution, and most importantly, creative pre-testing. Each and every week, we publish a new audio case study on our blog. You can find it at cumulusmedia.com or westwood1.com. And when you're there, you can sign up to get the weekly audio case study sent directly to your email box. Thanks so much for the opportunity to take you through the very latest on the power of sports on AM/FM radio. Thanks so much.